what difference would it have made if you experienced healthy, pure, safe male affection?
Man, I think I would have been a different type of emotional being. Like, I think, I think male affection is so important. It's so important. I remember the first time a friend of ours told us that he went to some country and the men held hands. And the men laid their head on each other's shoulders.
They would never, ever.
I'm going to say this. I'm not there yet. But
That's what John did to Jesus.
Yeah, I love the freedom.
I love what she said right then. That's what John did to Jesus, because that's so true. I mean, it's so interesting how, the world has its own view about men in terms of like what masculinity is built around. And yet we have a great example in the Bible, Jesus. I mean, he was the most masculine, right? He was the walking example of what that could look like. And so the fact of the matter is, like, this being such a foreign thing to him is so interesting, because the one we follow has allowed that type of behavior with his male counterparts, So it's just really interesting to see like the cultural dichotomy with something like what we're facing now in modern times versus like what it was like in biblical times during Jesus's walk on earth. So that's just really interesting. But Jackie Hill Perry, she asks the greatest questions in the world in this show. I love this.
You respect it.
But yeah, I respect it. And I'm not there because I just didn't grow up in that culture. I do think that culture matters, and I do think every culture is different. Every culture doesn't need to be the same. But I do think that it's a lot to learn from cultures like that, because it's way bigger than physical touch. I think that's what we have to realize. It is a freedom that allows us to interact with just other human beings in a way that just makes our life better.
Okay, explain that.
Because I think it's binding to always be worried about, do I look manly or not? How can you truly?
That is absolutely so true. And this is why the enemy tries to isolate us, right? Because he understands that the more intimate we are with each other as people, the closer we are to God, because God wants us to commune with each other. When 2 or 3 are together in his presence. I forgot that verse. I was just reading it too. But, when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, he's in the midst of that. And so that's why the enemy wants us to be isolated so much and worry about those egotistical and prideful things, such as, do I look manly enough, or is this feminine enough if I want to go that route, And so I think that's just super important to like keep in mind as we navigate with people, because these days, like, we're so isolated from each other that it's turning off all chances of intimacy. And so I think that's a really good point to like point out those cultural differences, and to also be mindful of like what intimacy looks like and what it's supposed to look like.
Truly walk in love if you're consistently worried about if you look like a man.
That sounds stressful.
Because manhood is a calling. This is what I told people, in my reel the other day. I said, one of the biggest issues I have with society is when people say, be a man. You're not being like a man. No, God made him a man. Now you can help him to be more of a man.
Yes, I love that, because that's exactly what happens with society, where men are told to like be a man, act like a man, do manly things, which in and of itself like isn't a bad thing, but culture likes to flip things on its head, you know what I mean? And so at the end of the day, like, God made you a man, so you are a man by default. You have the essence of a man. Everything you do is manly by default. Everything else is learned behavior. And so I love him pointing that out, because that's so true in terms of like, because that's where like the ego and the pride can come in again, right? And you have a distorted identity now because you've been told for so long that this is the way to be manly, but you're like this. God made you this way. And so I think that's really important to point out.
But don't tell him that he's not something that God created him to be. And I think a lot of times men are just afraid to walk in who they are. And this is the reason why our relationships are jacked up, because society puts so much pressure on us to look like, no, I can't not be a man. That's who God, I'm actually a man.
Right.
but I can't actually be a man because I'm so consumed of not looking like one.
Ooh.
And I think that God wants us to be free. Because when we are free with our wives, with our children.
I like his shirt, by the way. Rest in peace, MJ. We just reached, what has it been, 15 years since his death? Yesterday was his death anniversary. Favorite artist of all time. Just had to do that right quick.
Everything is just better. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you are.
And so I think that
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
yeah, I think that God just wants us to be free.
You said if you experience male affection, you would be a different emotional beast. Why emotional?
Again, with her questions, like, come on now. On point.
Because I think everybody is emotional, but I think that the way we handle our emotions look different depending on how we were raised. And so even in my poem, Who Gives a Black Man Permission to Feel, I said, it took 2 years into my marriage for my wife to see me cry once. And when she did, I thought I failed her. I thought she doesn't need a weak man in the house at this time.